Throughout this service, there are bricolages happening throughout this service. So as we talk about that, I hope you were thinking, when did I see that happening? Some of it has been intentional, and some of it, like in What to Do with an Idea, was unintentional, but we made it work. So keep looking for where is that happening in this service. Some of the best guidance I have found was in the book Improv Wisdom by Patricia Ryan Madison. And she wrote this: what we are attending to determines to a great extent how we see the world and how we interact with it. So what we are attending to determines to a great extent how we see the world and how we interact with it. A close version of those words were written by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Dalai Lama, and Desmond Tutu, different cultures, different religions, and decades apart. The parallels between the observation of these spiritual leaders and Patricia Ryan Madison, well, the parallels are striking. It has to do with trust, interconnection, the importance of the focus of our attention, gratitude, and taking care of each other. In both improv and the reflections of spiritual leaders, there is an assumption of a desire to connect with that which is larger than oneself, either the group or the spirit of love or God, something larger than the self. Developing a nimble mind will be key to our survival. This is something I am convinced of. To be able to pivot and see new perspectives and to find possibilities where we didn't see them before. To engage with those possibilities or multiple realities as a default setting. The way we think automatically, that is what we are going to need to be able to do to move through the years ahead of us. Over the course of our lives, we find some of our plans morph until they're no longer recognizable, or what we thought was certain breaks apart and shatters. Friendships, a job, marriage, the trajectory of a career. We can react by retreating and becoming small. We can choose to be broken, or we can take what we deem as good and right from what remains and bring it together in a new form, sometimes as an adaptation of the past and sometimes a totally new creation. Remember, we cannot replicate anything to be exactly the way it was in the past. That is impossible. Sometimes I will admit that choice is made for us because maybe the loss is too great, or the shards are so small they're impossible to use. But often we have considerable power in the choice of how to proceed. It takes practice to imagine the unimaginable. In Robert Bly's poem, Things to Think, he asks the reader to think of ways we've never thought before. He writes, think that someone may bring a bear to your door. Or think that a moose has risen out of the lake and he's carrying on his antlers a child of your own whom you've never seen. When someone knocks on the door, think that he's about to give you something large. Tell you you've been forgiven. Or that it's not necessary to work all the time, or that it's been decided that if you lie down, no one will die. We will thrive if we practice ways to keep the mind nimble. Often we are forced to become flexible when disaster hits and there is nothing to hold on to. A Japanese poet and samurai wrote, "The barn having burned down, I see the moon." Despite the losses, this can be a time of discovery when it feels that everything has been lost. The moon. Did you see the moon last night? If not, go out tonight. It will be close to the same. Maybe we don't need to wait for something as dramatic as the barn burning down to see the moon. The word bricolage, which is new for me, has been around since the 1920s. So, Anne, it's been around a long time. It's a blend of French and English, meaning to tinker, to do it yourself. In art, it refers to using different kinds of materials to create specifically a sculpture, materials that happen to be on hand. So no fair going out and buying something. It's got to be like what is around you. And then here's this word, a bricoleur is also someone who makes dinner. I hadn't even seen this about Anne, makes dinner from whatever remnants of food are in the fridge. So you can not just be doing leftovers, you're a bricoleur. And actually there are apps now. You take a picture of something that's in your fridge and it will tell you recipes for what could happen with those leftovers. It can also be a handy person fixing jobs around the house. Social bricolage is when there aren't many resources and we take unexpected, unrelated bits and pieces that happen to be available to reassemble a life. If you have moved to a new community, if you've gone through a major relationship change, it's like that. We are forced to practice bricolage when resources are scarce. And just as hope is easier to find when we are practiced at identifying it, or kindness comes easier when it becomes a spiritual discipline, bricolage is easier in a hard time if we exercise it all the time. A person who is homeless could be considered a bricoleur, fashioning a campsite from discarded things, getting their mail at the community center, taking a shower at the YMCA, eating dinner at the food kitchen. They are bringing together in a very creative way a life. Basically, social bricolage is improvisation in the human endeavor. Lofty words. In a wonderful anthem that we'll be singing in that choir that was mentioned earlier, the lyrics are, "The stone that the builders rejected became the cornerstone for a whole new world." That's what I think we're going to be looking at in our future. And those words go way back to the Psalms, to Isaiah, to the book of John, to Corinthians. That's where those words are found. The key word in that definition of bricolage, social bricolage, is improvisation. And there is a password for those who do improvisation. Spiritual leaders would affirm that same password, and that password is yes. This is not necessarily the yes to do one more responsibility, so don't confuse it with that. And it's not yes to something that puts you in danger. Don't confuse it with that. Don't say, Reverend Beth told me to go do this. No, no, no. This yes is when we put on a coat of confidence to try on something new, some challenging task. It means saying yes when we feel uncertain and trying something when we're not an expert. We will make mistakes. But if we become skilled bricoleurs, maybe the mistake will become a part of something in the near future that's quite positive. Saying yes in this way affirms others who are with us and builds confidence, builds community. It's considered yes to the unexpected instead of an automatic no or the other word, but. Improv wisdom, remember, there are people who prefer to say yes, and there are people who prefer to say no. And those who say yes are rewarded by the adventures they have, and those who say no are rewarded by the safety they attain. Maybe this time coming up is not going to be a time for safety. There's also a line that comes after that I did not put in the reading. There are far more no-sayers than yes-sayers, but you can train one type to behave like the other. So I warned you, I informed you that there would be some participation. I also want to acknowledge that this service will go a little longer than normal because we started my sermon, just a little bit ago. But I ask that you stick with it. This is the first improv that I'm going to ask of you. We do improv all the time when we walk through the world in the day, so don't get too nervous. I'm going to ask somebody to say something that you did yesterday out loud to the group. Very common thing. Please make it not something that took you tons of courage to do. For example, I opened the refrigerator door. But what I want everyone else to respond to, no matter what they say, is, "That is amazing," or "You are kidding me, that's fabulous." Something that's incredibly affirming. Think about what you might like to say to be affirming to someone. I mean, that's a little over the top, okay? So what would you say? Go lift it up, be in your... Okay, so what would you say to affirm others? I know, I mean, come on, a little more than that. I'm so impressed. That's amazing. Fabulous. Okay, so who would like to give us an example of something they did? We had one example. Could you say it again? He got out of bed. And you say, "Oh my God, that's amazing." I can't believe it. That sounds so delicious. I can't. That's wonderful. Thank you. Just call it out, just quickly. That is, I wish I could do that. That's great. Just call it out. Let's go.
I did 3 loads of laundry.
Yeah! The world is a better place. I think that's fabulous. A few more.
I made a great big pot of spaghetti for my cousin yesterday.
That sounds, somebody is well fed. That is such a good thing. Oh, fabulous. One more.
We made chili yesterday.
All right, there's a well-fed congregation. That is fabulous. Oh, no, let's all go there. I had one over here.
I went to work yesterday.
Yeah! Oh, on many, many levels. That is great. And just one more.
I went to a craft fair.
I think that is probably some fabulous things you got there. I love it. Okay, so you're on a roll. Whew. So just know you can always do this for each other. Yes-sayers find ways to continue a conversation, so it's always yes and, and make it easy for others to participate. They go easy on their friends and their work companions when they've forgotten something or make a mistake. And when they make mistakes themselves, they either correct their mistakes or, even better, they capitalize on those mistakes, just like what we were saying. Don't get down on yourself. Just say, "Oh, how can I use that? My earring fell off with the fabric. All right, give up the other one too. The microphone fell off. Pick it up and let's go." They create bricolage, taking mistakes and successes to create something new. We are so going to need to do this. Meet the moment with all that you authentically have. Julia Child, I didn't know we were going to talk about food and cooking quite this much. Julia Child is a humorous, or was a humorous but adventuresome cook who brought her approachable style to cooking French food to American people through cooking classes and cookbooks and TV, when TV was a really new form of media. During one show, she was moving a chicken and it just slipped right out of her hands and onto the floor, and the cameras just kept rolling. And then she just flipped it into the pan and said, "Oh, well," she had this very interesting voice, and continued with the show like nothing had happened. And I assume that chicken got served up. She always had a recipe, but she also always adapted, making things up with a pinch of this and some of that. And people were stunned. They loved it. They loved it. They could do the equivalent of dropping that chicken when the world was watching and keep on going. Sometimes we'll find ourselves over our heads, and we'll make mistakes, and we'll have to ask for help from others, or ask and give forgiveness often, assuming no ill intent. Instead of blame, the question becomes, how can these errors be well used? Political analysts are assessing what has caused a broken social system. And we can also start preparing in our own way to sharpen our skills as a bricoleur, to assess what has worked in our past and refashion it to create something new. May we find ways to always live into that yes and.